we're going to start tonight with David Haye, and more on his proposed fight against Audley Harrison in a moment. But first, Mike, Twitter is all the rage this week, and Haye has had a few words to say explaining why the Klitschko fight couldn't be made.
Yeah, that's after telling Audley Harrison, or Fraudley as he's called him, that this career-high payday, as he describes it, for the fight, which we think might happen on November the 13th, won't cover his medical bills. He then went on via a video message on Twitter to talk about this so-called 50-50 deal to fight Vladimir Klitschko that's fallen through, and there's widespread criticism of Haye on the forums and elsewhere that he's running away from the Klitschkos, that basically he's frightened of them. And he's addressed this 50-50 situation, and he says, if you give me, and he's talking now addressing Vladimir Klitschko, 50% maximum of all the territories, including Germany, where they generate huge TV income between them, the Klitschko brothers, of all the ticket sales, then the fight's going to happen. Now, he says Vladimir didn't want that to happen. So he said, I gave him an alternative. You keep 100% of the German TV money. I keep 100% of the UK TV money. Everything else is 50-50. And he says, again, Vladimir Klitschko turned that down. So we're into Gordon Brown, Tony Blair territory here. It depends who you believe.
So we're going to see Haye against Harrison then, Steve?
Well, we're not officially going to see it just yet, Ellie, if you don't mind me saying so. We're getting a lot of trouble, us three here, if we start talking about it as a done deal. It's a possible fight. It's possibly going to happen somewhere up in Manchester on about November the 13th. It'll sell out when it's possibly announced in about 24 hours. We'll decamp up there, possibly for 5 or 6 days. And it will be, if it does happen, it will be. We were talking about this earlier on. I think it's one of the biggest ever all-British fights. Forget the title that's on the line. And what's more interesting, we think that David Haye might make more in this fight than any other British boxers made for fighting in this country. Now that includes Ricky Hatton, Joe Calzaghe, Amir Khan, and more importantly, Lennox Lewis. We think David Haye might clear more money than any other British boxer has done in this country. And that's why, if it happens, because it could possibly happen, I'm hearing, if it does happen, it will be enormous, Ellie.
But the question is, for all the money he makes, does he lose in terms of credibility and reputation? And that's the argument on a lot of the forums, that he will do, because if you remember when he came into the heavyweight division, he said he was going to face 2 top 10 ranked contenders and then go for a world title for one of the Klitschko brothers if they were still champion at the time. Now, maybe his business sense at the time should have told him that it wouldn't be as easy as that, but that's the question being asked now. You know, where were those promises that you gave a couple of years ago when you embarked on this venture into the heavyweight division?
But you talk about the people on the forums and on the websites. The purists are going to hate this, aren't they, Steve?
Well, the purists are going to hate this, although it's been suggested, it's been an idea for a very long time. Maybe 2 months we thought this fight might happen. Now we're fairly sure it will happen. And one or two people have come around. There's been a lot of lively debate online. Just dismissing Audley Harrison isn't enough. It doesn't work that way. Boxing's not that simple. You have to sort of build a case, and I've tried to build a case over the years, sometimes tongue-in-cheek, for Audley to be involved in a fight like this. And what's going to happen? No, I don't mean this disrespectfully, but forget the purists. Even if there's 10,000 of them out there in the internet, and 10,000 of them out there buying the Boxing News and the Boxing Monthly, the world's 2 finest boxing papers, in my opinion. Forget them. This appeals elsewhere. This is a back page fight, Ellie. We haven't seen one of those and had one of those for too long.
Well, let's talk to a man for whom I'm sure this is music to his ears. Good evening to Barry Hearn. How are you, Barry?
I'm very well, thank you.
Now, you look after Audley. First of all...
Let me correct you. My son Edward looks after Audley.
He looks after Audley. Apologies
yes,
for that.
I'm an interloper in this conversation. I'm an interested bystander.
So, from your sources, Barry, would you say that this fight is likely to be made?
Well, over Sunday lunch last week, when we all sat down, the family decided that it's a very good chance it's going to be made. And as Buncey has alluded, quite rightly, I think it's a better than even money bet. So look for the space early next week. I know that the Harrison camp, headed up by my erstwhile son, is very excited about the prospect of this fight because they believe they're going to have the next WBA heavyweight champion of the world. And we are giggling ourselves silly over the purists and the traditionalists who don't take punches on the chin, who have opinions about how people should make their money and have never walked up those 5 lonely steps to the loneliest place on earth, especially in heavyweight boxing, which is the boxing ring itself.
And Barry, given all the big nights that you've been involved in down the years, where would you put this in terms of its magnitude, what it could possibly be?
Well, it's a good question. Those of them with a very long memory remember my first big fight was Frank Bruno against Joe Bugner. At the time, that fight was, people were deluded enough to criticise that fight. The BBC actually refused to take the fight because they didn't think, quote, it was of interest to the British fans. ITV, however, through my friend Greg Dyke, decided they would do it, and it was my first venture, and Bruno was very much the prospect that Britain loved, and Bugner was the bad guy that beat Henry Cooper and never, got the love of the British people. 31,000 people bought tickets for that fight, and it hit a TV audience of 18.5 million. So once again, congratulations to the then BBC head of sport, got it absolutely spot on. This is a very similar contest. It's very easy to deride both of these fighters. Independently, I can look at Harrison and say he talks a good fight and has never delivered. Technically, I don't like a lot of things about his style, but he's a big old boy. And as he saw in his last fight, when he throws a left hook, even if he doesn't know what he's doing, he throws a very mean left hook, as Michael Sprott found out with 2 minutes to go from the end of Audley Harrison's career, one of the great Houdini acts of all time. On the other side, we have David Haye, the Haymaker, the blown-up cruiserweight, who's obviously a good fighter, no question about that. But he's been in with a circus freak, Valuev, who really can't fight at all. He's been in with John Ruiz, who the day after the fight announced his retirement, and most people thought the only thing wrong about the decision was it should have been 3 days before the fight. So therefore we have two fighters that both of them have failed to deliver promises or ability. They make the perfect fight together.
Barry, do you think there is a case here though that I think things are harder than they were during Bruno? I was at the Bruno and Bugner fight, and it was a major event, even though a lot of people were critical at the time. It's just that at the moment, it's not just 24 journalists being critical. It's a lot of other influences. I'm talking about the internet. I'm talking about the proliferation of radio stations and podcasts and stuff.
These people have no idea about what is big, Steve. There are some traditionalists, there are some internet geeks in there, there are a few people. It's a bit like your average fight fans, 500 of them go to a fight and everyone tells you that's boxing. It's not boxing. Boxing's about what appeals to the wider audience. This is not just a fight. This is not a fight for fight fans necessarily. This is a fight for the whole of British sport. This is a fight for the people that don't go to boxing. These two guys, one thing they can both do better than any fighter I've seen before, with the exception of the great one, the Louis Ulip, is they can sell. They can sell fights. They're going to insult each other. There's no love lost. It has every ingredient necessary to make this the biggest grossing heavyweight fight in this country and one of the biggest grossing fights in Europe, I think, for the past 20 years. And the reason being because the average man on the street wants to see it. And they've both got a big mouth. They've both got a very high opinion of themselves. A lot of people would say without justification, I might be one of them. But nevertheless, this sells. This show will sell out in a day or two. It will get the highest pay-per-view audience, should it happen, of course, on Sky Television. They've recorded for many a long year. Sky would be absolutely delighted to air this should the deal be signed over this weekend so we can announce next week.
At the Hearn dining table over Sunday lunch.
Oh, everything. That's the whole focus of British sport is settled around the Hearn dining table on Sunday lunch. Whether it's darts or snooker or boxing, or that's where the action is, my dear. People think it's in Murdoch's headquarters or BBC or ITV. Forget it. It's round the Hearn table, and we're not allowed to discuss it until we've eaten all of our vegetables.
And I was looking today, Barry, at one of the bookmakers' quotes. It's 8-1 on David Haye, but by the time the fight comes around, Audley Harrison is such an articulate character that you'll believe in what he said, that he has got a chance.
I would never encourage people to gamble because I think it's a sin. But, I have to say, that's the most ridiculous odds I've ever heard. This is a two-horse race between a guy that has done very well so far, David Haye, although, remember Carl Thompson, remember the knockout where he got absolutely plastered with a right hand on the chin, and that was from a cruiserweight. Suddenly he's going in with a guy that can really bang, and I'm not going to tell you that Audley Harrison is the second coming of Rocky Marciano, but he's 2 stone natural weight bigger. If this is a two-horse race, there's no one else can come on. If you get any type of odds like that on Audley Harrison, please indulge yourself and win a few holidays.
Listen, Barry, thanks so much for talking to us tonight, and may your gravy never have lumps.
Well, I'm sure it's going to happen, and I think also you're going to see on a serious note, one of the great heavyweight fights you've ever seen.
Great stuff, Barry. Thanks very much
Barry.
indeed. Do you know what I love about what Barry just said to us, Steve? He's not making any comments about the quality of the fight. He's not saying it's going to be two really high-quality fighters, but it's just going to be a hell of a scrap.
Elliot, I've been doing something the last 4 or 5 years. I've been going online and defending myself, and sometimes defending Mick, and sometimes defending BBC boxing against a lot of these purists, a lot of these internet guys. He called them geeks. I'm a bit more respectful of them, and I've been going on and battling them and fighting them. And I go on. If you do a history of me on a dozen different websites, I'm spending probably too much time. And I'm going here and I'm fighting the corner. And what I'm trying to say to them is, listen, in an ideal world, David Haye fights Vitaly Klitschko or Vladimir Klitschko at Wembley in August, and we open the doors for free because the government sponsor it. That's in an ideal world. But we don't live in an ideal world. But so if you take that away, this sport is boxing's a unique sport in the sense that business always comes first, and occasionally a fight breaks out between two men in a pair of shorts with no tops on. And what we've got here is, and I hate to say it, I agree with every word that Barry Hearn says. That doesn't make him right. I just agree with every word he says.
And sometimes you can't rationalise why a particular fight sells. And I remember interviewing the late Terry Lawless, a great manager and trainer down the years, not so long ago, and we were talking about this phenomenon and how sometimes you can't explain it. And he said, I once went to watch Tommy Steele. Now that man at the Palladium a long time ago, but he said he can't act, he can't sing, and he can't dance, but the place was full. The place was absolutely full.
How many occasions have we had in the past? Think of some times when the fight has not actually matched the build-up.
Well, the big one is, and Barry said it straight away, the big one really was that Bugner and Bruno fight. And I understand why the head of BBC Sport refused that one. I really do, because Barry is a shrewd businessman. Barry's always laughing and joking, but he's a shrewd old businessman. So he's probably asking for a lot of money, and Greg Dyke probably came in at cut price and did a sort of deal on that. That was the polish, the proverbial, as they say.
I believe there was an even bigger one than that. Lennox Lewis against Mike Tyson in 2002. When it was first announced, there were a lot of people saying this is a mismatch. Tyson is so far gone. But come fight week, and I remember in particular, Steve, after the weigh-in on the Thursday, and he looked ripped on the scales, and he was articulate, and he was sounding nasty, and everybody thought this is the old Tyson back again. And yet the fight itself, after the first round, was so one-sided. It was. In the end, it was borderline boring if it wasn't for the fact that it marked the real end of Tyson's career.
We'd love